Hello and welcome to the Conscious Dying Symposium, which is being sponsored by End of Life University. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and I'm glad you're tuning in to listen to this interview. I hope you've already listened to Ken Wilber's interview, which was posted yesterday about his book, Grace and Grit. And then I want to remind you that on Saturday, May 16th, we're having a live Q&A session, and that begins at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So be sure and check your emails for call-in information about that Q&A session. And I'm hoping you will be able to join us for that when you'll have a chance to ask your questions and also make comments and join our discussion about conscious dying. Today I'm very excited to welcome my special guest, Reverend Olivia Bareham. Olivia is the founder of Sacred Crossings, and she is a certified death midwife, home funeral guide, and celebrant. She holds bachelor's degrees in education and natural theology and sacred healing, and is an ordained interfaith minister and celebrant. Olivia's experience as an auxiliary nurse, hospice volunteer, and her mother's end-of-life caregiver inspired her to investigate a more meaningful and personal alternative to traditional funeral practices. In an effort to facilitate the healing process made possible at the end of life, Olivia immersed herself in the study of death and dying, culminating in certification as a death midwife and home funeral guide. She subsequently created Sacred Crossings with the mission of empowering and guiding families to reclaim the lost art and healing ritual of a home funeral. Over the past 9 years, the demand for information about conscious dying, after-death care, and home funerals increased, and Olivia began teaching classes and workshops on the art of dying, after-death care, and home funerals. Olivia is a writer, producer, and public speaker. She is an active member of the National Home Funeral Alliance and past president of the board for the Los Angeles Hospice at Anam Cara in Topanga Canyon. Olivia, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you, Karen, for inviting me.
Well, you're welcome. I'm really glad to have you here. I've been aware of Sacred Crossings for quite a while now because I've heard about you from other speakers I've interviewed. So I've checked out your website several times and the trainings that you offer, and I've been very excited to have you here. So I've kind of saved you for this particular conversation about conscious dying because I know that that is one of the subjects that you teach about. And so I was hoping we could just kick off our conversation by talking about how you define conscious dying as you're teaching it to people.
Well, conscious dying for me is about approaching one's inevitable end of this physical existence with an open heart, the ability to be with whatever is, hopefully free from their fears or any entanglements or attachments, so that the actual leave-taking, if you will, or transition is as graceful, as effortless, and even joyful as possible. And that's a big task, and it's one that is not really possible in a few days. So my belief is that one needs to begin to step onto this journey years and years ahead of the time. So there's no time that's not too soon to begin the conscious dying journey.
I love that definition, and I can say what sparked my interest in conscious dying is through my work in hospice and seeing that the patients I worked with who had done the kind of preparation that you're talking about, who really had managed to move beyond their own fear of death and had really worked on preparing for that process over time, had I would say, the easiest transition process in my observation. And that's what made me feel this is such important information to convey to people and to help people overcome their own fears, to know the more they prepare for the dying process, the more beautiful, the more open they will be, the more meaningful it will be to them, and I believe the easier that passage will become.
Exactly. It's really no different to a birthing process, that the mother who approaches her birth consciously and makes a plan and prepares for it and reads about it is much more able to have a gentler, more meaningful experience than one who's in denial, shut down, and just goes to the hospital at the last minute, of course. So it's all about preparation and having the courage to step onto the path, and knowing that just talking about your dying and embracing it doesn't mean it's going to come any sooner. I think that's what a lot of people are a little afraid of, that if they start thinking about it and planning for it, it's bringing it on somehow, and that is not the truth. We have to dispel that myth.
And isn't that interesting? Because it does seem that that's a component of denial, no matter what we're in denial about, that we think if we ignore something, it won't really happen. And then the converse, as you just said, if we think about it or we do prepare for it, we will be inviting it to come earlier or sooner. And so that's such a good point that you make. And it's a great reason for us to be having this conversation and posting it publicly for people to hear, because the whole intent of it is to dispel the myths and to help people confront their fears.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I believe that it can actually be joyful, and we can collectively change the whole arena around death so that it could be one that we anticipate with an excitement rather than a dread. That we've gotten to the place where we are not attached to anything, that we're really not only just ready but willing to go, looking forward to the journey, whatever that is. We're not afraid of not knowing what it is. We dare to stand in I don't know and feel exhilarated by it rather than terrified by it. And that's what I'm proposing, that we could eventually as a collective get towards. Mm-hmm. And having that at the end, or something to aspire to, will only enhance our life. It will make every step of the journey more exciting, being here.
Absolutely, and it gives us a focal point around which to organize our life, in a sense, a focal point of meaning for life too, so that when we face our death consciously and we're preparing for it, it instills every moment that we're alive with much more depth and meaning, because we've already acknowledged that we only have a short time and we're going to live fully while we are here.
Yes. Exactly. It makes every moment more joyful. I've heard people say, yes, but if you say that if you're ready to dying, then what's the point of living? And that's something that people get a little mixed up, that if you're going to prepare for your dying, then, well, life doesn't really matter, because I'm spending all my time thinking about dying. But the opposite happens. It enhances every second, because you value every second, because you know with every cell of your being that this is going to go away. So you make the most of the moments.
Yes, and that's exactly what I witnessed when I first started volunteering in hospice. The very first patients I saw that I was so in awe of and so inspired by was the fact that that's how those hospice patients who had no choice but to face the fact that they were going to die soon, I saw them living with so much joy and so deeply in each moment, and really making the most of every single experience they had, because they didn't know. They didn't know this sunset I'm looking at right now might be the last sunset I ever see. And it inspired me so much to think, I don't live my life that way at all. At that time, I wasn't being at all present in each moment, and I wasn't remembering to enjoy every experience that came my way. And being with patients who were dying is what taught me that, really opened my eyes with how to live consciously and therefore someday be able to die consciously.
I think you're absolutely right. And you said the key word there is being more present. I think when we embrace our dying, we acknowledge it and look forward to it, it cannot help but make us more present to the moment. And that's the goal, isn't it? And waking up in the morning, being present to your day, present to your feelings, present to your physical condition, and then moving forward from there, from the heart space.
Mm-hmm. And therefore present with your loved ones and present in your surroundings and in nature with everything that comes to you. Mm. So we're definitely on the same page when we talk about this idea, though, of, as you said, conscious dying. It can't just happen in the moment, in a moment at the end of life. It's really important to prepare for it. So that's why it's so necessary that we give a wake-up call to our society to get people to start thinking and start working toward this process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's key.
And I wanted to ask you, when you teach about conscious dying, what do you recommend to people who want to prepare more for their own dying process? Do you have any particular practices that you recommend?
Well, I'm actually formulating it as a year-long course, because up until now I've been teaching it in a weekend and realizing quite obviously that is nowhere near enough. After my own very focused journey of 10 years, meditating on my dying every day, and it takes a long time, and you get to little pieces at a time. It's not something you can do, I think I'll read that book, and okay, I get it now, I'm going to die consciously. It doesn't happen that way. It's a lifelong process, and it takes diligence and presence and focus and daily meditation. So my first request is that people spend at least 5 or 10 minutes every day in acknowledging the temporary nature of everything around them, and that their physical body is going to end at some point. That would be one of the very first things. And then I also speak of practicing, if you will, the knowing that we have a body, but we are not our body. Mm-hmm. Some people, we get very attached to, this is who I am, this is my life, therefore when it ends, I'm gone, or there's nothing left. And I'm also speaking to atheists more and more, interestingly, because this has nothing to do with religious beliefs at all, but just the fact that you who are listening to me right now, it's not your body that's listening to me. There's the awareness that is Karen, is listening. That's the piece. So I practice becoming more and more aware of the difference between that which is my physical body and that which is the awareness that I have a physical body. And more I can hold the two together as equally important and inextricably intertwined and separate. And that is what happens at the end. I think they completely separate. The awareness that is Olivia, the awareness that is Karen, some people call it the luminous body, the spirit, whatever you will call it, separates from this physical shell. Mm-hmm. And just the notion of those things, I believe it takes more than one time to hear it, and repeating it to yourself every day or sitting in quiet contemplation about it helps to untangle it, if you will. And each person will come to their own experience of it, and that's what's important. You can't hear it from me and know it. You have to have the experience yourself, because you're going to die alone. No matter who's around your bed, this will be you with this awareness and your own practice. So it's empowering people and putting this responsibility back in their being. There are many cultures who spend their entire life preparing to die because they are aware that this lifetime is a teeny tiny blip in the vast eternity. Mm-hmm. So if you want to ensure a good passage and potentially or possibly an existence beyond this one that is more vibrant than when you came in, then you want to spend your entire life preparing for that at the end. And that's what they do. And it's interestingly, seems to have been what has happened to my life.
Mm-hmm.
My daily practice is preparing for that. And I'm no expert, and I'm not sure that I will be able to do it well, but
Mm-hmm.
I hope
Well,
yeah.
I was going to say I could say the same thing for myself, particularly after I began working with hospice patients and woke up to that same awareness that I too will die, this physical body will die. I would say I've lived with that awareness every single day of my life since that time, and felt myself like you to be in this process of just preparing for it and of asking how can I live my life the best way possible now so that I could leave this body at any point and be ready for that.
Well, it's interesting you say that. That's another thing I encourage people to do, is to volunteer hospice and sit bedside with those who are dying. I believe that everybody should midwife at least 3 times the death of one of their beloveds, their parents, a best friend, a spouse. I think if we each had that opportunity to really and deeply care for them, assist them, sit with them as they're dying 3 times, when our time comes, just that, even if you didn't become a hospice volunteer per se, those 3 experiences would completely change it for yourself, and you could help you become better prepared. And this is a deep, profound teaching, and it's offered to everybody free. And yet we push it away, and we give it to professionals, and we push our elderly and sick into institutions, and we're actually robbing ourselves of these incredible spiritual gifts that will actually enhance our own transition. So that would be my goal for everybody, to death midwife 3 times. And that's one of the reasons I teach the Art of Death Midwifery, so that anybody can be the midwife for their own loved one.
And I love that you're emphasizing that anyone can do it, because I do think in our society we tend to professionalize these processes, including birth and even illness. I mean, we've kind of lost our ability to even deal with illness ourselves, and always feel we need some professional to take over and tell us what to do.
I know. Isn't that such a shame? Thank you for saying that. That's what we need, to empower ourselves and reclaim the lost art of birth and death, and know that we're born with the knowledge. All we need to do is to reactivate it and remember it. And we have everything we need.
That's so true. And I like that you were saying that in some societies, every adult prepares for death throughout their entire adulthood, and yet in our society, we're spending all of those years avoiding even the thought of getting older. We're so in denial about even our own process of aging that we're having plastic surgeries and Botox injections and trying to keep our bodies looking younger, because we're so afraid of the very natural process of allowing the body to age.
Yes, even the words that we use, like saving a life. When someone's 82 and they go to hospital and they have a heart attack, and we call it saving their life because we've brought them back, we've actually just prolonged their life. And I think if we start using words like that, rather than save, which indicates, oh, you've been rescued from this terrible thing called death, rather than, no, we've just prolonged their life a little bit. We were successful in prolonging it. It still has that hanging over there that, and still one day they are going to die of something. Maybe it wasn't this heart attack, but later it will be something else. So include that as you leave the hospital, the knowledge that you will still die. Interesting, I'm going to share something. When my mother was born, her grandmother made the christening robe and gave it to my grandma. She also made the burial trousseau from the same piece of cloth. And it was traditional in our family to have these 2 white garments, the christening robe and the burial trousseau, presented to the mom so that she knew that one day this infant that she was holding would one day die, that burial trousseau would be put in a bottom drawer and would travel with them everywhere. When Mom was married, it got transferred to her bottom drawer. And the idea, too, that it's made full length. It's made like 6 feet long so that hopefully your infant would grow into it and have a long and successful life. But if not, that was okay, too. But it was this expression of the inevitability of the end. And embedded in that is, so enjoy every moment.
And it's so beautiful. I love just the fact that it's a ritual handed down from generation to generation, that it's so profound in the wisdom that it carries with it.
Yes. I was sharing it with a group of students one day, and I had a Sikh in the room, and she told me that the Sikhs' turbans are actually the exact length of their shroud, so that if they were to ever die, they have their enough fabric on the top of their head to wrap their entire body. I thought that was wonderful.
That is.
They're carrying it every day with them.
Yes, that's so fascinating. Well, and as you were going back to talking about saving a life, I often address other physicians, and sometimes I hear physicians say things like, well, occasionally some of our patients do die. And I stop them right there and say, no, every patient you ever see dies eventually. Every single patient dies because doctors still carry, it's a little bit of a fantasy in a way that they really are saving lives. They really are saving people from dying, and don't stop to think about, just as you said, you're forestalling death temporarily, but everyone is going to die. And I think that mix up in our thinking is one of the major problems in our medical profession, and why we struggle to deal with the end of life, because we just really haven't been taught to think that way.
No, I agree. Even the words like fighting cancer and failing, it won the battle. It's this incredibly stressful idea that those last few days and weeks and months of your life will be one fought with a sword against this demon that's trying to attack you and kill you. It's like, oh my goodness, what about opening and surrendering to it and asking it to teach you something, and having the courage to be with it in that journey, potentially, possibly allowing for something to change energetically and vibrationally within the body, so that maybe it didn't need to keep growing. It's just another way to look at it. I think it's kinder and more compassionate to oneself to not fight to the bitter end.
And just the anxiety and the fear that are embedded in those words, fighting, and that metaphor carries with it a great deal of anxiety and fear, and how can you relax and feel joyful when you believe that you have to fight every moment?
Yes, and then you read in the obituary, he lost his battle with cancer after a long fight. I feel how sad that man died losing, with a feeling of failure and helplessness. That doesn't bode well for if there is potential an afterlife, that you died this one after a failure. I don't think there's such a thing as failure. We cannot fail.
I totally agree, and that's such a good point, and it's so pervasive throughout our entire society, that mindset that we must fight, and the idea that it is a failure. It is a failure if we don't somehow overcome this illness. But I have a notion that sometimes illness is part of our sacred path. It's part of our sacred journey, and it's what we're meant to learn from.
I agree totally and wholeheartedly. In fact, Bruce Lipton is a dear friend of mine. He's a cellular biologist, and works very much on the quantum level, and he speaks that the cancer cell is the one smart cell in the body, because the trillions of cells that are normally working in harmony to provide us with a very healthy, vibrant existence, when the environment is not healthy, the cancer cell will move out and start to create its own little colony. So rather than cut it out, we need to go in and fix the environment, which is created by either the food you eat or the emotions that you have or the habitual thoughts that you're doing. Change that so that this one smart cancer cell doesn't need to be like the black sheep and creating something that's toxic to the community, but that can then be maybe brought back home in a healthy way. And I just love that idea that we're looking. It's like the fish in the fishbowl. The water is the environment. The fish is going to be fine. You don't have to worry about the fish. You worry about the water. And if you keep that clean, then the fish will thrive. And so I think it's time that we looked when something feels off, we investigate that. Like what is it? Is it my emotions? Is it my thought patterns? Is it something I'm eating that's upsetting the environment so that a cell would have to go and do something obnoxious? So.
And it makes sense the cancer cell in some ways is just sounding a warning. The cancer cell is just the messenger who's standing up to say, there's a problem here. Take a look more deeply.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, I know that you teach a course and work with people to help them prepare to die consciously, but do you feel people who are motivated can do this work on their own if they really set their intention to it without having a guide, or do you feel it's really necessary to have a guide through the process?
I think anybody who wants to make this their journey, and I hold death as my guru. He is the teacher for me. Anything that I really need to address, I can learn through embracing this thing called death of my physical body. So I'm doing it for myself, so I know that anyone else can. It's helpful to be in a group, I think, while you do it, to listen to other people's thoughts and their own experiences. That always helps. Being maybe motivated to read books or create meditations that will assist. It's. I think that's why we learn anything and go towards a teacher for support. But absolutely, I think anyone with the intention to approach their dying in a conscious way will naturally be led to the right book or group or course to do it.
And at this time in society, while we're seeing a lot of change happening, I think, fairly rapidly in the end-of-life arena, but it still may be hard for an individual who decides, I'm going to be conscious of my death. They may not find very much support in their immediate environment, and their friends and family may not be thinking that same way and may actually discourage them. So it might be nice for them to find a community of other people who are seeking that same knowledge.
That's true. I mean, even doing one thing like asking yourself, how would I like it to be when I died? Would I like a casket or a shroud? Just that, entertaining that question and allowing yourself to move towards imagining yourself in either a casket, and what might it look like? And daring to then write that down and say to your beloved, when I die, I would like to be wrapped in this piece of fabric or that dress or that suit. And then please put me in a casket and cremate me, or I'd like a burial and where it would like to be. These few things, just taking the time to ponder them, will just by themselves stir up stuff that then you can begin to move into emotionally. Mm-hmm. But that's a big part of the process, is preparing on the physical level. And for people who don't want to go there maybe emotionally just yet, start from there.
I think that makes a lot of sense. To, as you said, to start with the physical details, and maybe it's even completing an advance directive for your healthcare wishes, what you want for healthcare at the end of life, because that's a little bit more tangible on the physical level and concrete.
Yes. Who would I like to be around me when I die? What kind of environment would that be like? I've also created a little booklet called An Advanced Death Care Directive, and that has lots of questions about what kind of funeral you would like, what you want where, who do you want to bathe you, where you want your ashes scattered. And so if you take the time to answer all those questions, write them in a booklet, and then share them with your loved one, it's not only you daring to embrace those details, but it's helpful to your family too, because they want, somebody's got to make the decisions. And it feels wonderful when you know that you're doing the thing that your loved one wanted, rather than, I don't know whether she would want that. Should we try that? Maybe she wouldn't care because she's dead anyway. All of those conversations would not happen if you took the time to write down what it is you want. I think that's a big step.
And it's a tremendous gift to your loved ones after death to know that you have made those choices for yourself, and to be spared having to come to some kind of agreement together. Just as you were saying, without any guidance, the family members end up having to pick and choose, and it's so much less stressful if they already know.
Yes, I mean, I had one family who the father died, and the wife, the brother, and the sister, they were all outside in the hallway of the hospital arguing. One said he swore he wanted to be buried. The other one would never be buried. I knew he wanted to be cremated, and the other one said no, he was going to be interred in a crypt. So.
Wow.
And they couldn't move the body until they'd made this decision, and it was so sad to feel that this lovely energy that had happened in the hospital and was now broken up by a family feud almost. And it went on for a long time.
It's so painful for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that you also help people plan home funerals, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more, if you just tell us a little bit more about that aspect of your work.
Well, it's interesting that this could be part of the conscious dying conversation, because in my experience, having a home funeral actually assists all of those who are involved in having their own conscious dying when their time comes, because it's an opportunity to be present with the body for 2-3 days, if need be, however long the family want, to just exhale and to not rush away and to send the body off to a professional, but to just be present with it and care for it tenderly, bathe the body, dress the body, allow it to still lay in the home, for people to come and to gather, to pay their last respects, to be together to support the family. There's so many benefits to extending this period for 2 or 3 more days after the last breath. And in my experience, it's not only a very powerful experience for all of those involved with the family, but also perhaps and the one who has just transitioned. Mm-hmm. If we go on the premise that there is an awareness, a luminous body, a soul, if you will, that is now no longer attached to the physical, maybe it needs a little more time just to also adjust to the fact that it's no longer in there. Mm-hmm. It is now moved on to another experience. So it's just that period of transition. And it's interesting when you compare it to when a baby is born. It takes 3 days for the milk to come down. If you look into a newborn's eyes, you can see it's not really here yet. Mm-hmm. It takes about 3 days for the infant to, okay, I'm in a physical body. Whoa, what is this? And suddenly milk appears, and now it's actually eating physical. So now it is in the physical realm. I think it takes 3 days at the other end too to completely disentangle and release from the physical world. It takes the soul, the energy, awareness, 3 days, and it takes the family about 3 days to breathe into the enormity of what just happened, to relax, and then maybe to ask themselves, who am I now? And then to move forward into their new life. Mm-hmm. So for me, the home funeral is just that. It's an opportunity to transition for everybody.
And I love that. I love the concept of the 3 days, because I think that's easy for all of us to grasp that, why it would be important to slow everything down for that 3-day period, take our time and just be present and even enjoy that process for 3 days. And we live in such a hurry up, rushed society that it's rare for us to stop and do anything that slowly for 3 days. But it makes sense to me that it's so important to be consciously slowing down and taking our time at the time of death.
Oh, yes, it's huge. And when you slow down, then you get to allow yourself to feel feelings that you couldn't have felt before because you were, like you say, in too much of a hurry. And when you're just at home, the body is laying there and you're feeling what you really feel, perhaps for the first time in months, because you've been so attentive to the one who's dying, especially the full-time caregivers. They haven't given themselves a minute, and now they can. They get to feel and experience and release and allow for those 3 days, and then they move on with the funeral service. And it is such a contrast to those families who have to give up or choose to, or they don't know that they have a choice to let the body go, and suddenly it's in a black plastic bag and it's zipped up and it's on a gurney, and now suddenly there's a big hole in their life and their home and their family, and all it's left is question marks. Like, where is he? Is he in a refrigerator? Is that cool? Did he have to go into a refrigerator? Who's going to touch him? Is he going to be embalmed? What are they going to do to him? You don't really need all of those questions. You need to be breathing into the loss, the death of your loved one.
And I know for in some cases there's not an open casket at a funeral, and so the family members and loved ones might never see the body of their loved one again. And then I'm also hearing that many families nowadays are choosing not to even have a funeral.
Yes, that's tragic too. And also the tragedy, I think, is not having the opportunity to see the body and say goodbye. And very often in a funeral home, they will request embalming if you do that, which is sometimes outside of people's budget, or for whatever reason they prefer not to do that to the body. Then they've lost the opportunity to have those quiet moments, which is, again, tragic. Sometimes I think it makes healing and the grieving process a much more difficult one when you don't just embrace it as part of the process.
And maybe because it came up, and I know that you know about this, it is, if you keep your loved one's body at home, it's possible to keep them without embalming and to have some sort of visitation process in your own home for others to come in and be with the body. Is that correct?
Oh, exactly, yes. When a loved one dies, we'll go to the home, and we guide and support the family through the process of bathing the body and dressing it, laying it in the box or laying it on a table, and we help the family use dry ice to preserve the body for 2-3 days, however long they need, so there's no decomposition takes place. It's completely it's completely fine, and it's legal, and there's no danger to this process. It's not scary. It's the most natural thing in the world, and that's what people need to embrace. Mm-hmm. When they see it happening to their loved one, it helps them. And then on the third day, the funeral service usually just takes place in the home. So you don't have to take the body somewhere else to a venue. You can if you want, but most people choose to have the funeral, a simple funeral service in the home, and then it's taken directly to the crematory or the cemetery. And the family can do all of this themselves. That's our goal. The home funeral movement is designed to empower families to take on this process for themselves, to bathe their own loved one, to dress them, to care for them, to preserve them with the dry ice. And what we're here to do as guides is just to support them through the process.
And as you were saying, it's not just the patient who's been working on the conscious dying journey as they're approaching death, but the entire family is part of that journey, and the entire family has this opportunity to take back this natural process of death and dying into their own home and become conscious in that moment themselves of their loved one's death and of their own death.
Yes, that's what we're here to do.
And so it's wonderful that there are sacred crossing guides as yourself to help all of us with that process. And I wanted to, while we're talking about it, because you mentioned the Advanced Death Care Directive, I was hoping you could let listeners know how they might, where they can find that directive if they'd like to download it, and then also how to get in touch with you if they wanted to work with you.
Oh, sure. Well, our company is sacredcrossings.com. We're helping families in Los Angeles right now. I also teach the Art of Death Midwifery as a 3-part course, with the goal being that anyone can midwife their loved one through this process. That's right up to the funeral service, that what we call the celebration of life, which I think is extremely important, and everybody deserves one. And I think it's important that one looks into what's possible for a celebration of life and how perhaps to put it together. And the one who's making their transition can be a part of that. Say, I would like this music, I would like these many people, please do it outside in this environment or in this venue. And it's the best party of their life. And many people now are choosing to hold this before they die, call it a living funeral, because they want to participate and they want to hear what people have to say and be a part of this last big hurrah before they transition. So it's interesting that maybe the funeral will become more of that, a very large, extravagant final event with the loved one able to receive all of the gifts of love that their friends and family want to bestow upon them before they go. I mean, how about that for assisting you to then finally take your breath and ride out of this earthly existence? Instead of we wait till we die and all of those people gather in a room and they all say such wonderful things and the loved one is not there.
Now, and I just love that concept, because I thought about, for me, when I was much younger and my own grandparents died and I lived in a different state and, of course, traveled to be part of the funeral. But I remember thinking, you know, I have this sadness inside me because I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to tell them how much I love them, and I can express it now. But if only there had been an opportunity before they died when I could have been with them and could have said the things I would like to say. And so I think of how much easier the passing of our loved ones would be for us if we had that opportunity, if we'd been able to say our I love yous and our thank yous and our goodbyes while they're still alive.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you bring up something. I recently helped a woman. She was just glorious. She was only 65, and she had been diagnosed with a cancer that would probably be very swift. So she was expected to have 2 weeks, which is an enormous thing to breathe in and to deal with. And she did it with such grace. And when she invited me in, I could tell right away that she didn't really need a death midwife. There wasn't really much to do to help her. She was very conscious and very prepared, and she was surrendering to this inevitable thing. But she looked at me and she asked me if I would help her son and her family, because they were struggling much more than she was. And that's what inspired me to suggest that she have a living funeral. And she did 4 days later, and like 200 people came. She could barely breathe, but it was the last opportunity for her to be able to sit up, and everybody got to embrace her and tell how much they loved her. And she just received and received and received. And the very next day I went to see her, and I said, it's just so astounding to watch how gracefully you are embracing your dying process. And I said to her, what is it that enables you to do this with such ease, whereas so many others are holding on or afraid? And she thought about it for a minute, and then she said, Olivia, I think it's directly related to my capacity to receive. I've been a doer my whole life, been producing and creating and doing and being out there in the world. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've focused pretty much entirely on learning this other art, the art of receiving. And now I lay here on my deathbed, and all I've got to do is receive the sunrise, the birds, the trees, people coming into the house, caregivers caring for me night and day. So how could I not have a big smile on my face? Because while I have my arms open and I'm just receiving, it's impossible for me to hold on. You can't do the two at the same time. And she had a twinkle in her eye. And she said that ceremony yesterday was the pinnacle of my art of receiving that I've been endeavoring to learn over the last few years, because I feel completely filled up. There's only love just pouring into me from every corner. So I'm ready. And she lay on her deathbed with her arms outstretched. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so beautiful, and it makes me think that when we really look at the dying process, in some ways, it has been structured to allow us, or actually require us, to learn how to receive, because we gradually lose our capabilities and our faculties for doing for others and doing for ourselves, and we have no choice but to learn how to receive when we can embrace it, when we can embrace that process. And that's such a lovely way to put it. It's just about learning how to receive.
Yes, we give birth, we receive death. What if our whole life was just one big inhale and exhale, giving birth, receiving death? And it happens endlessly, spiral after spiral of this beautiful process. And we've just forgotten the receiving part, the end.
Yes.
We've been pushing it away, Yes.
Yes. It's a gift that we've decided we don't want to receive. So, yes. We're keeping our arms closed to it, which is just so sad, because it's the greatest gift we could actually receive.
Yes. And death is the greatest gift for those left behind, too. They get to feast on the death. Stephen Jenkinson, who is wonderful, he speaks into that of receiving. When somebody dies, there's a banquet table set before them, and those who are left get to feast at the table on the death. Everything we eat is dead, isn't it? Even a salad, the leaf is plucked, it's dead. Death sustains us constantly, and the same happens when a loved one dies. And what if we could do that instead? Have a feast at their wake, which is what they used to do in the old days, sharing stories and loving each other up and enjoying this just unconditional flow of love towards one another. That's a feast.
I love that. You just inspired me to put that in my advanced death care plan to have a huge feast after I die. But since I love eating, so that makes sense to me. That would be very nice.
Write it down and say what would you like them to eat? Just one dish that was your favorite.
Oh yes, that would have to be chocolate cake then. So.
Oh yes.
Well, that's just a very lovely idea. And I can see it could end up being a 3-day feast or multiple feasts over 3 days' time.
Yes, well, that's what happens during a 3-day home vigil.
Mm-hmm.
The kitchen, people are cooking in the kitchen. They're bringing over food. Some people are with the deceased, saying their prayers in private, and meanwhile in the kitchen there's cooking and voices and sharing, and it's a beautiful cacophony, if you will, of life and death. It's just so fabulous.
Mm-hmm. I love these images that you've created for us, the visual images, Olivia, and how free of fear all of them are, and even free of sadness as we talk about these images and imagining the family, imagining the living funeral, imagining a 3-day vigil. There is no fear in any of it. There's just simply love and joy.
Yes, that's true.
So thank you for painting those images so beautifully.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. It's, as you can see, it's food for me. I'm every new family who calls. I just feel so blessed and so filled with gratitude that once again I get to step into this liminal space and feel so fed by the love and care and kindness and compassion. Oof.
And so your work right now is quite varied, it sounds like, because you do go to families' homes and you do serve them as a death midwife, but you might also be the funeral celebrant. You might be throughout that entire process helping them plan the funeral and burial.
Yes.
But then you're also providing education. So you have classes for people who want to become death midwives. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Here in LA, I've been teaching this for a while now, and Sacred Crossings is expanding, and more families are requesting the home funeral and therefore the services of a guide to help them through the process. So there are people now who wish to take this on and actually do this work. So perhaps I'll move more into the teaching, and others will do the work, and hopefully more and more families will see the need and the joy in doing this, and we could actually change the whole face of what a funeral really is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do know that some hospice workers have actually been getting trained as death midwives because they feel just the hospice work alone may not be enough. They'd actually like to get more deeply involved with families. So I could imagine there might be listeners on the call who would enjoy coming to LA and taking a training session with you.
Yes, that would be lovely. I do have on my website, sacredcrossings.com, under education, it lists the classes and workshops. I haven't put next year's up there, and I think my fall class is pretty full. But yes, I'd be more than happy to do that, and even go to other states if they can get a group together. I'd be happy to go teach it there, because I think it's desperately needed, and there are groups of people all over who are hungry to do the work. They just need a little guidance as to how to get started. So, and the website, the Home Funeral Alliance website, also lists guides who teach this in other areas of the country. So you could go there to find details.
All right, so anyone listening in could go to your website, sacredcrossings.org.
It's .com.
.com, sorry, sacredcrossings.com, or to the Home Funeral Alliance website to get more information.
Yes,
and
that is .org.
That is
HomeFuneralAlliance.org.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, this has been an absolutely beautiful conversation, Olivia. I just appreciate so much the work that you're doing, but the intentionality with which you're doing the work, and the beauty that you're bringing to this entire subject of death and dying.
Well, I thank you too, Karen, because what you're doing in putting these conversations out there is so needed, and I know so many people are fed by what it is you're serving them. So bless you for that, and I'm supporting you 100%. Whatever you need.
Thank you. Well, yes, we're on the same team, and it's been just totally delightful to talk with you today, and I know that our listeners have enjoyed it as well. So thank you again, Olivia, for taking the time out from your busy schedule to share with us.
You're so welcome. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.